Hello and welcome to All for Women's Football. I am back in the hosting seat tonight and I am very excited. We're going to have a little look at the recent Under-19 European Championship, as well as just have a little nosy at what's been going on in the Olympics. So I am very excited to be back. Let's get going. We are back. I have missed that little intro. I love it so much. It's so much fun. How are we all? Barry, first off, how are you? Let's go around and check in on everyone.
Yeah, loving life, enjoying the Olympics, enjoying it all, to be honest with you. It's just lovely to have some time off from the wonderful children.
Meg, go on. How are you doing?
Yeah, happy to be back. I've not been on for quite a while. Been on holiday and then getting back into the swing of things at work, which is absolutely mental at the minute ahead of the season starting. But no, really happy to be back on.
Oh, it's a tough life going off on holiday. However, we are grateful to have you back. And finally, Mia, how is it going?
Yeah, all good here. Same for me. I think it's been 4 weeks since I was last here. So it's about time I show my face. Just make sure everyone remembers who I am.
It is, to be fair. I was getting a little bit concerned that we might never see you again, to be fair. However, I've been skiving off my hosting duties, so I can't really say anything. Meg has kindly many times stepped in for me. So this week was my turn to step in for her. So hopefully I can do this week's show justice. So we'll dive straight in. We're going to just talk a little bit about the Under-19 Championship first. So obviously Spain came out as winners of that tournament, beating Netherlands. However, one thing that it has kind of made us look on a little bit is the kind of gap there is between the under-19s or the sort of youth development program and the senior squad. So Spain obviously won, like we would probably expect. England bowing out in the semi-final. Would we have expected England to do a little bit better? Now, I know it's a bit of a tricky one because we faced Spain in the semi, a team that then went on to win. However, this is only our fourth time we've got into this competition in the last 7 years. We were runners-up in 2013. We won in 2009, but basically being a runner-up in 2013 was the last time we really, I don't want to say achieved anything because that's the wrong word, but let's say placed. We had a finish in place, either first or second. So, Barry, I'll start with you. Would you say this could be classed as a success or sort of neutral for the young Lionesses?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to take into account Spain quite clearly are just dominating football at the moment, aren't they? Doesn't matter whether they are little boys or little girls, they are absolutely kicking the bejesus out of just about every single football nation that's out there. They put paid to the men in the most recent tournament. They've now put paid to our young Lionesses. They put paid to our older Lionesses. They are just absolutely rocking it. So I think losing to Spain is not something that you should be necessarily downbeat about. That's just, it could have gone either way, and they certainly weren't humbled. But it does bring up the sort of the broader question as to how it is that this happens, that a certain nation might have this sort of domination. You've spoken a little bit about Spain just now dominating. Prior to that, Germany were doing quite well as well. So we seem to have these moments where other European countries are dominating and finding a way for their under-19s and their youth players to be performing at a higher level earlier than England currently seems to be doing. I know you're going to come out with all the stats, so I won't steal all the stats that you've lovingly researched. But there's a stark difference. And it's not to say that the Lionesses aren't performing at youth level and at senior level, because they clearly are. But it's the timing that it happens. And I think at the moment it's getting there. Let's not forget, football's a little bit behind for us at the moment. But I think it's a really important thing to recognise that it's going in the right direction. And a semi-final, let's be honest, is really not that bad. Out of all of the teams that are going to play in these competitions, only one can win, and it can't always be you even if your name is Spain. So, it's maybe coming, just not yet.
Yeah, I think that's it. Spain are just insane, to be honest. At the minute, they are dominating all over the pitch, all over the world, across every age group. It's somewhat insane. Meg, kind of following on from that, then, in fact, not even just England, how do countries like England go about catching up, essentially? Because whilst obviously we are putting a lot of investment into football, into the women's game especially, Spain continue to do so. So how do you catch them up without them just continuing to kind of grow almost?
You can look at it so many different ways, but obviously you sort of, I guess, have to look at it from the bottom upwards in a sense. I think there were over 70 new girls emerging talent centres introduced in the last 12 months, Grimsby included, which is like weep for Grimsby, because, women's football in Grimsby's, it's on the up. A few years ago, it was literally almost non-existent. So I think the fact that there's so many more of those emerging talent centres, which sort of allow for a more clearer pathway into, first teams, whether that's, a WSL team or just a local girls team. I think those sort of pathways, allow for a clearer sort of journey throughout the youth groups, because there's so many youth groups. I think it's under 16s where it becomes like you part of like your first actual England squad at under 16s. And then, you've got all your age groups. And it always baffles me that there is, not baffles me, but like there is literally, there's one nearly for like every age group, especially in the men's. You've got like under 16, under 17, and it always baffles me like a lot of the time, because like surely you've got a squad, a very similar squad in one, age group than you do in the other. But I think these ETCs are definitely sort of a massive thing in terms of also like girls gaining access to, local football as well, because the reason Grimsby introduced theirs was because the most local ones before that were either Hull or Doncaster, which are over an hour's drive away, which girls shouldn't be doing, on a weekly basis, just to access sort of, professional standard of football coaching. So the fact that there's more, regionally and, across the UK means there's more girls playing football, and that hopefully allows for more girls to come up the pathway and, be spotted by the people at the top. And hopefully that, continues, and that will hopefully allow that sort of gap to be bridged between the under 19s and the Lionesses.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned all the kind of different age groups, because there are a lot of different age groups, but not really the tournaments to kind of go along with them. Mia, do you think that that is something that could be rectified? I mean, maybe that needs to be fixed more on a kind of international scale, as in on a European scale with UEFA?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the big thing. And we've said this before, that to go from under 19 and then the next big women's tournament is the senior team is just crazy. That's such a huge leap. And then you've got this brilliant pool of players sitting in the under 23s who are getting game time for England in the under 23s, but they're not partaking in a tournament where there's something to win. There's that even more competitive aspect. So I think that is massive, and it's something that, should, I don't really know why it isn't a thing. It should absolutely be a thing. And it'd be really interesting to see, because I think Katie Robinson for me is the one player that comes to mind who's like a yo-yo player, comes in and out of the senior team, drops back down into the under 23s. I think something like that for her, to see her shine. And you see these names like Jess Naz, who's come in, and you see her in Tottenham, but you don't really know too much about her unless you are an avid watcher of WSL. So those players are surprising when they come into the senior setup, and we don't really know anything about them, and then they go straight into this high profile sort of environment, like high intensity environment that they haven't been a part of since the under 19s, which, if you're 23 years old, that's a good period a good few years ago. So yeah, I think that's the case. I think also when you look at the coaching setup, I think that's a massive part of it too. And you have some fantastic coaches in the under-23s and the and in the senior teams. And then I think women's football, as you start to look down, maybe it's less high quality, and it's all about that pathway. It's all about that pathway and how successful that pathway is going to look. But Sean, it's probably best I don't turn my lights on. We'll leave it like that.
Yeah, I'll just address this quickly. I've already told Mia that she resembles some kind of troll in like a cave, which might be one of the nicest things I've actually ever said about her, to be honest. Before we kind of get on to the next question, I'll just answer this one really quickly. So we have under 23 teams, but there's no real tournaments for them. So they kind of play the odd game here or there, but it's not like the under 19s where they've got the championship, which is basically an annual event, and other competitions. So it's almost, it's not really bridging the gap, I don't think. It's just a camp. It's almost like a camp just to keep people on retainer. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Just going back then briefly to kind of Spain and the reasons that they are just so incredible. So interestingly enough, only 4 under-19 Lionesses have played any WSL minutes during the last season, compared to 16 in the French team and 10 in the Spanish team. Now, do we think that this is a coincidence, or is it genuinely a case of the more minutes a youth player, an under-19 player can play in top flight football, progresses their career and makes them essentially play better in their youth tournaments? So, Barry, I'll throw that one on to you first for your thoughts.
Well, that's basically what we were alluding to in the last part of your previous question, which is that it's not a coincidence. Of course it's not. If you've got under-19s that are playing at the highest level in their domestic league, clearly that's going to have a positive effect on them as players, because their evolution, their development, all of that is going to be supported by the fact that they are playing at the highest possible level. This is half of the problem. Mia alluded to it a little bit earlier as well. There is such a big gap at the moment between, in the WSL, especially the youth team and the first team, and that gap isn't going to get bridged by continually sending them out to championship clubs, WNL clubs. It's just not going to do it. It's not going to cut the mustard, because the WSL is the level they need to be playing at. So unless these players are farmed out, a la Grace Clinton to Spurs, where she has the ability to go on and play well and regularly, it's just not going to have the impact that we want it to have. These other countries have already recognised that. They've already understood that. Now, the WSL is a fantastic league. You know, it's one of the few leagues, and I won't call it the most entertaining league necessarily, but what it is it's a league where on their day anyone can beat anyone, and you know that that's a possibility. You look at some football teams on the continent especially, and you know that they are basically going to make up the bottom half of the table no matter what. You know, we had Liverpool not doing particularly well 2 seasons ago, and the next thing you know, they're finishing 4th. So there is that ability with just a couple of good signings, some good work in the backroom staff, and some slip-ups by other football teams to ensure that we have that excitement. That's only going to happen because we've got the level of players that we've got. Now, it would be interesting, certainly back in the day, there used to be a rule as to the number of people you could have in a squad. Sometimes it's down to the nationality of the players. So you've got to have a certain amount of national players in your squad or in your team, in your starting 11. And these sorts of rules really do help. If we were to have that within the WSL, that, I don't know, 2-3 of your starting team must be domestic nationals. 1-2 of your team in your squad must be at under 19 level or something like that. All of a sudden, the rules are fair for everybody within that league because it's exactly the same. And that would maybe go away into WSL clubs looking at their sides and going, right, well, which ones are the best ones that we've got in our youth team? Who do we think could possibly get that jump? Give them access to the better training. Because again, you go up to a championship club, with all due respect, they might have good training facilities, but they're not going to be necessarily the level of the WSL sides. So there needs to be some serious work done from football clubs at WSL level, and hopefully by NUCO. It won't be this season, but it's certainly in upcoming seasons, where if we really want to see that and we want to take it seriously, that we want these young players to do better, because we know they do well. I know you're going to come up with a cracking stat about the Lionesses and how many of them represented at youth level for England. And that's a fascinating statistic. It just shows, however, I'm going to have to say it now because I've put a little bit too much into it, but the fact that all of them have been represented at youth level is absolutely fantastic. And it shows that the pathway is working. The problem is that it's just too wide from playing at youth level to being able to play at senior levels. What they really need to do is to shorten that pathway. At the moment, they're having to do a marathon to get there, when really it should only be a 400-metre run, maybe 800 metres at tops.
Yeah, I think you've made a lot of very good points there. And I think Grace Clinton is one of the best examples of alone working. You know, I'm obviously going to be slightly biased here as a United fan, but I think even if you look at this objectively, her loan spells have been hugely successful. She obviously went to Bristol. After we signed her, she went off to Bristol, played really, really well for them, then came back, went back out on loan to Spurs, a WSL side, was pretty much their player of the season, has got herself into the England team senior, and is now basically ready to, in my opinion, be a starting player for Manchester United. So a fantastic example of what can happen with a loan spell. You know, it's not all kind of terrible and doom and gloom, but I think some of these players are maybe just sent out on loan as a way to kind of get rid of them because clubs don't know what to do. So with that kind of in mind, Barry sort of mentioned it before, but Meg, do you think that there's more that clubs can do on a domestic level here at home to kind of bridge the gap between what is essentially the academy and then their first team? You know, is there anything that they could put in place to improve things there?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I think one of the sort of things that we, you know, could look at is the fact that the WSL is probably the most sought after league to play in. You know, most players would say, oh, I want to play in the WSL at some point in my career. And that's anyone from across the globe. And I think last season, 60% of the WSL were foreign players. So it just kind of goes to show that the amount of foreign players that are now in the WSL probably means that is a factor that these academy players are getting less minutes because they're not needed, essentially, maybe. But I just think of Katie Reid, for example, for Arsenal. I think she came on and made her debut. I'm sure it was the last game of the season or something, like so late on in the season. But you need to see those players like appear regularly throughout the season, like, you know, in the Conti Cup and like early stages of the FA Cup as well. Like those are the games where you can really sort of allow those players to shine, and then you can be like, right, you know, she'll definitely be here. She might have to go out on loan, etc., etc. But I do think that clubs, they almost need to look after their players more in a sense of, like, yes, they're only looking after them because they're their players, but they need to realise that they also want, you know, game time for the Lionesses or the under-23s or the under-19s as well. And you have to sort of manage that as well. And it's so hard because clubs, you know, all they want to do is, you know, do well, you know, as a club. But then you do have to look at the individual players. And, you know, I'm trying to think, like Michelle Aguiman as well as an example. She's an unbelievable player, unbelievable striker. You know, she hasn't appeared for the Lionesses yet, but, you know, I'm sure it won't be long before she does. It was interesting because I was looking at the starting 11 when Serena first joined the Lionesses and the most recent starting 11 for the Lionesses. half of the starting lineup was exactly the same. And I think that plays a massive part in the fact that they're almost scared to dip into the younger players from the younger age groups, you know, in the setup. Say, oh, you know, come up to the Lionesses and play some games, but it should be happening so much more often. So we sort of see, you know, a bigger rotation, because Serena, you know, when Serena ends up leaving, there'll be so many players that they'll eventually bring up into the Lionesses that have not had any senior experience as of yet, and they probably should have done at that point. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about Serena. We see that the England squad kind of remains very similar. Most of the big changes have come forced due to player retirement. I wonder if some of that is also when Serena came in, we had kind of a sudden influx of like youngish players coming through anyway. You know, if you look at like Ella Toone now, obviously Letizia was kind of like on the outer. She's made it into the team. But I mean, even players like Leah Williamson is pretty young. There's a couple of like oldies sort of on the edge there, just about clinging on. But it will definitely be interesting to see what she kind of does moving forward. I would like to see more youth players coming through. So I did a bit of digging, and it was quite interesting, really, because you can almost see the exact moment that Spain pumped a load of money into their grassroots football. So if you look at the winners, basically, of the Under-19 Championship, it's fairly mixed. A lot of Germany in there. Then all of a sudden, about 10 years ago, Spain just appear, and they have won like nearly 6 in a row, basically. They were kind of briefly, there was a little France victory in there that kind of stopped them. But they are just absolutely dominating. And that seemed to come off the back of them basically getting a lot of investment in their grassroots. So, Mia, I'll sort of throw this one over to you. Do you think that just simple investment at the lower leagues and at the lower stages, at the lower age groups, that it can just be as simple as that to kind of improve the game?
I don't think that's the case. I think you can pump as much money as you want to into the lower leagues, but unless you're being given the chances where it matters, where the ambition is, where the dream goal is, it's pointless. There's no point because there's no end goal. Don't get me wrong, we absolutely need more investment in grassroots level. That's where players come through, that's where people start their love for the game. But most of those people, when you're a kid, now more than when we were kids, it's now a case of I want to be a professional football player. I want to play professional football, and that's a goal and that's an aim. And if you can't get there, there's a problem with that. And it's not a case of not getting there, but it's a case of if you think how many of those youth players do we see in the WSL, there's a small problem there. And it's only right that those young players go to America and go to different parts of Europe to try and get that sort of professional level up to scratch. And it is a shame. It swings and roundabouts with the WSL because I do think the WSL is the best league in the world. You have some of the best players in the world that play there. You look at Liga F, and they have to rely on homegrown players unless you're Barcelona or Real Madrid, because the money at the top it's not as commercial as the WSL. Right? So you have to play your younger players, and that's where they get in these chances to play against some top players and have 90 minutes most games. And I think you have to. I mean, this is the conversation topic, but it is all about bridging that gap. It is a case of, like Barry said earlier, is there a way that potentially we can cap the amount of players that are brought in? Because you look at the under-19s and the talent that we have as for England in the under-19s and in the under-23s who are just sitting and waiting. And I'm not being funny. Maya Letizia has had to wait to join the senior squad, and she's playing out of position. Like that, she's being forced to play in a fullback position. That's not her position. So yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic, and it's something that I don't really know the answer to be fair, Jess. I think you absolutely have to sort the grassroots out, but that's to get more players in. But where are they all going when they reach 18? That's the big problem.
Yeah, I think in some ways we have shot ourselves in the foot a little bit with growing the league as we have, as in bringing in so many kind of overseas players. Now, don't get me wrong, it's made the quality of football fantastic. However, I do wonder if it's kind of halted us domestically a little bit and is sort of taken away opportunities for our own homegrown talent. And the thing is with women's football, it's difficult to go and tell like a 19-year-old, an 18-year-old to just go overseas and play in Liga F. It's not like men's football where they can go, they'll have a private Spanish tutor. At 18, I probably would not have wanted to just be shipped off to another league somewhere by myself. Obviously there's players that do it and I have so much respect for them. But it's not that simple. People typically, in this kind of scenario, I think majority of them would rather stay in the UK. It's where everyone's friends and family are. It's not like there's a load of money. They're not going to be getting paid a lot and go and live a lavish lifestyle. They're probably going to be quite isolated overseas. And that is something that is not for everyone. I just want to bring up this question from Sean because I think it was pretty relevant. So I'll open this up to whoever wants to jump in first and answer it, to be honest.
Yeah, I started in the first place purely because I don't disagree with the sentiment. I think actually it could work, but genuinely, I just feel my only point on this is if they're going to do it, it's got to replace the Conti Cup. I just think there is no point if you're going to ask WSL clubs and championship clubs to get involved in another tournament. And don't get me wrong, I'm one of those who calls for more fixtures at the top level, but that needs to be within the league structure, not within trophy structures. So I think that actually, if you were going to make that sort of decision, you get rid of the Conti Cup, you bring in effectively this as the new, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the nice way, decorated version of the Conti Cup. The two that I was trying to think of, Meg, I couldn't use, not on a PG show. So I think that if you did that, that would work a lot better. And actually, that would be with the WNL. I don't know if you noticed, but in that WNL Cup, they are now offering prize money. It's not the biggest amount of money you're ever going to get, £7,900 for the winners of the FA WNL Cup this year. But that's £7,900 more than they were getting last year. So you can see it starting to go. And actually, if you then amalgamated that Conti Cup with the WNL, you'd then all of a sudden have a much bigger prize pot that could start to be trickled down amongst those two tiers, tier 3 and tier 4. And I just think that would really, really help with exactly what we're talking about. And then eventually you might end up with leagues that, if you did send your young players to the championship, are a little bit more competitive going forward.
Nice. I agree with that. And quite honestly, anything to get rid of the Conti Cup because, well, we discuss it endlessly on here. It vexes me. And oh my God, Mia has turned a light on. My eyes. Everyone, look away. No, thank you. It's nice to actually see you this evening, Mia, to be honest. I thought that you were just like a little demon or something in the corner there. And if you just carried on, I actually would have probably gotten nightmares tonight. That's enough beefing Mia for now. Anyway, I don't want it to be all doom and gloom because it really isn't. I know we've kind of said that England maybe has a lot that it can change or improve on, but Barry mentioned it before. So the World Cup Lionesses squad, 100% of that squad came through the what probably was the academies at some point, the emerging talent centres, which is a fantastic start. No other team in that competition could say the same thing. And interestingly enough, it works out at 4.3 players per year going to the senior team in the last 5 years, which again is a just fantastic stat. I really want to shout out Tom Gary because he did an incredible article with The Guardian, which is where I've stolen all of these stats from. So I will give him absolute full credit. He is living legend. I love the work he does for women's football. So head over there and check out that article because it goes through in quite a bit of detail where we kind of sit within this strange transitional period of not knowing how to get these players into the senior team, and it addresses some important issues. One of the things that he also mentions is making things more accessible. So making these emerging talent centres more accessible, which is obviously really important. So I'm going to go the other way around, and I'll start with Mia. But since Karen Carney's, I don't know what you want to call it, she did a big football review, let's say, we have seen improvements. Do you think that we are now heading in the right direction? And do you think that we just need to be a little bit more patient? Change is not going to happen overnight.
Absolutely. Both of those things. I think it's that review that she did was crucial just for us to know where we stand and where we are and what we have to do, because women's football just post Euros just grew so out of control. It was hard to sort of see what was happening. We all knew what was happening on the biggest level of football, but what was happening sort of in the grassroots levels, like we were talking about earlier, was a lot harder to look into. So yeah, it is really good that they're starting to open up these sort of, they used to call them centre of excellences. I can't remember what you've just said they're called now, but those sort of they are pathways, and that is the big thing. There was where I am in the middle of nowhere, I think we had two, and one was either in Ipswich and the others were in London. So if you're in the middle of both of those, where it's like a good hour and a half, 2 hours either way, it's just not accessible enough. And that has grown in my area, and I'm sure, as Meg said earlier, it's grown in her area, and it's just so nice. It's important. It's not even to force kids into playing football. It's if you want to play, it is here for you. So yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. We can't grow it too fast, I guess, because that's when things get sloppy and things get a bit sour, I guess. But I think where we are at the minute in terms of those centres, it's definitely positive, because the more we can have, the better, and it shows that the demand is there, and that is the main thing.
No, I think you've summed it up nicely there, to be honest. I will fire it around briefly to Meg and Barry, but to be fair, I think we've covered everything. So Meg first, is there anything more that you think we could be doing? It could be super simple, or it could be give all women's teams 100 million. Imagine the world is your oyster and just pick something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean that would be the ideal world, wouldn't it? But no, I think it's really important to obviously start from the ground upwards, as it is with, anything really. But I think when Karen Carney came out with her review, she said we need to fix it, and you don't necessarily fix something unless it's broken, really. So, she's made quite a big statements, essentially saying that the pathway is broken in a sense. So that sort of shows how much work does need to be done for it to be, at Spain's level, for example. So I think it's just so important. I mean, even with you then have to have enough coaches, qualified coaches, to be able to deliver all these emerging talent centres. And the fact that there is that amount of coaches available wanting to grow the women's game from that side is absolutely amazing. But hopefully it can sort of grow in a way that it doesn't get that we're almost forcing people to want to coach the game, if that makes sense. Like, it can only happen if we have the coaches available, sort of thing. But I think it's also, these emerging talent centres are brilliant for, the areas of low income. Like, there's so many areas around me that are classed as areas of low income. And I feel like the further up you go, the harder it is to sort of get into the pathway without spending a ridiculous amount of money. So if girls can get in it from the lowest point possible, and only have to pay a certain amount a month to play for these emerging talent centres, then I think that's the best way to sort of progress people without sort of saying, oh, it's only the people that have the money can go on to be the biggest stars in the world, because that's not how it should be. But I think the biggest thing that hopefully we will see is obviously the gap bridged from the under-19s to the Lionesses, because if there was an under-23s, European tournament, it would just make so much of a difference, because it's all right getting experience for, an England team playing against other teams, but tournament football is so different in a good way for everyone, because you learn about pressure, you learn about playing on the biggest stages, you learn so much. And to learn that at a younger age, but also a more consistent sort of age group, would be so much better. So I think, as Mia said, we do need to, be a bit patient, I guess, because there is a lot that still needs to be done. And, there's, I say, plenty of time to do it. There is time to sort of develop the things that need to be developed. But yeah, we are on the up, I think, and hopefully in the next few years we can see an improvement.
No, I think you've rounded that up nicely. And finally, Barry, my favourite little optimistic man, always leaves me happy. So just to round off this segment before we switch on to all things Olympics, give me some positivity. Are things looking in the right direction? Is there anything easy you think we could just throw in to fix if we were obviously the FA and in control of everything?
I mean, if we were the FA and in control of everything, then everything would have been sorted by now, because we wouldn't have to muck about with any red tape. I'd just be like a bull in a china shop and I'd fix it all. Sadly, I'm not, and neither are you. So as a result, it's going to be a little bit trickier. But listen, without wanting to be disparaging, as Mia's already said, prior to the Euros, women's football in this country, I can't speak for other countries, which I don't live in them, so I can't tell you what women's football was like there. But certainly in this country, was akin to a knockabout in the park. And what I mean by that is you see as much of the women's game on TV, on the news, all of that sort of stuff, as you did about your local Sunday league teams. They might occasionally pop up in a couple of lines of print somewhere. You never really knew what was going on with it. And that has all changed since the Euros. It's got gradually more and more and more people. We're on the telly now, there's fights. So whether it's going to be Sky that shows it, whether it's going to be BBC that shows it, whether DAZN are going to be showing stuff, is it going to be YouTube, the FA player? All of these things are happening. But we are in a culture of immediacy. Absolutely everything has to be done now, if not yesterday. And the problem with that is, and it is a problem, is that people are just going to have to put on their big boy and big girl pants and understand that that's just not how the world works, and that actually things take time. The way I would word it, the way I'd look at it now, I think, speaking as the oldest person on the panel, and possibly the oldest person in the comments as well, is this. When you're younger, you really enjoy watching and being around when it's Christmas time and when you have family around. And I can distinctly remember being sent to bed and then doing that bit where you crawl down halfway to see what's going on with all the adults that are downstairs. And the little numpties were playing things like Monopoly. And I'm a board game geek. I love that stuff. So I was genuinely like, oh my God, what is happening down here? Why am I not allowed to play Monopoly? So I'd make up, oh, can I get some water? Or can I play? They're like, no, we're having adult time. And at that point, you just wish, even at the age of 8, 9, 10, you wish that you were 18, 19, 20, and that you could be a part of that scene. And you want that now. And then you get to 18, 19, 20, and let me tell you, when you get to 42, you do sit there and you start wishing that actually being 8, 9, and 10 was quite cool. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we're going to get 20 years down the line in women's football and wish that we were back at the beginning. But I'll tell you, in men's football, I genuinely do wish it was 20, 30 years ago when we weren't having £100 million, this, that, and the other, football grounds named after Pizza Hut and stuff like that. Other fast food restaurants are available. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But I'm not suggesting that for the women's game. What decade was this, Barry? Before you were born, you wee sprig of a man. 1980, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. Brilliant time to be alive, by the way. So yeah, so here we go. Whatever. So basically, what I'm getting at with that is that I think that it will happen and it will get there, but it is going to take time. So just don't wish it away. Just enjoy being on the top of the wave that we're actually on at the moment, because I think we are really flying absolutely high. So yeah, it's all good. I think there's a couple of people in the comments that maybe need to calm down. Oh, there you go. Look at that. It wasn't even me. Ta-ra. So yeah, that's about it from me. I'm going to go back and purchase some more bits and bobs from websites. Ta-da.
Well, that was beautifully wrapped up. And yeah, I've got to agree. We've seen fantastic growth. And I am also getting old now. As a little side story that's really depressing for me, I went and got my eyes tested for the first time ever on Friday, because people in work were like, no, you're supposed to go regularly. And I'm like, what do you mean you're supposed to go regularly? My vision is fine. My vision is not fine. And I'm getting glasses. So that was like 120 quid or something. I don't know what the point of that story was, other than I'm 28 in like 2 weeks, and clearly age is catching up on me.
I've been going to the since I was about 3-4 years old.
Look, I did not realise. We were just talking about it in work, and someone was like, what do you mean you've never been for an eye test? And I'm like, what do you mean I'm supposed to go? Like, I've never had glasses. I've never had, I've just never been. I think maybe when I was in high school, someone came round and made you do that, but no one told me. It was one of those adult things that no one told me I was supposed to do. I don't get a letter saying, like, come to the hospital. I get letters about other, like, checkups, which are fun. But no one told me. So just FYI, if there's anyone in the comments that sees this, you are supposed to get your eyes tested. And yeah, so I put my hand over my left eye, and I was like, my God, maybe I do need glasses. It's quite bad. I don't understand the lingo, but I'm minus 1.5 in my right eye and minus 0.5 in my left eye. Apparently that's quite a jump to suddenly need glasses, but I don't know. Just, if you're ever in the distance, chances are I can't see you, especially if I've got something in my left eye, because my right eye is just no good for anything.
I'm meant to wear glasses.
Well, do you know what? Next time you see me, well, actually, I'm getting them next Wednesday. So next time you see me, I might have glasses. Interestingly, next Wednesday, the Olympics will also still be going on, which brings us into our next topic of conversation, the Olympics. Thank you, Sean. So I will just do a very, very quick roundup of who is currently at the top of the groups, and that is Colombia, the US, who have already qualified, and Spain. I hope that is correct. And I also just want to draw attention to an insane result. The 6-5 Australia, Zambia. What? Barry, your thoughts on that insane scenario?
The Australia game?
Yeah.
Absolutely unreal, that, isn't it? I mean, I think, first of all, the first thing I have to get off my chest is, why do I need a subscription to Discovery Plus or Eurosport in order to be able to access it? I think that I understand that you're going to want to sell rights as the host country and all that sort of stuff, but the fact that effectively all of this football is behind a paywall, it's really got my goat. I think it's just unnecessary. DAZN learnt their lesson by removing it from the paywall, by understanding that there's just not enough people that want to do that. I think that this is a really poor decision from people that have made that decision, and even getting the highlights is quite tricky. So I think that was a bad thing, and I needed to point that out first, so that if anybody ever sees this, they can feel suitably upset with themselves and go away and have a word with themselves. But having said that, I have seen the highlights of the Australia-Zambia game. Oh my God, what a time to be alive that was. I mean, imagine you're Barbara Banda, you've scored an absolute banger, so we'll call it Barbara Banger now, because that goal over the goalkeeper was absolutely unreal. 3 hat tricks in the Olympics. Like, oh my God, no, anybody else has ever done that before. And Australia just shipping goals. Oh, I don't know, like I used to put pound coins in machines when I wanted to play when I was younger. Not the gambling ones, little football games at the club when I was young. Around about the same sort of time I wished I was playing Monopoly. So it was unreal. And then watching how Australia came back, the penalty, I thought, I mean, like, it was a foul. She did step on the foot, but it was one of those where you did feel a bit for them. Just imagine scoring 5 goals and losing. I think that's the bit that I really struggle with. Like, you would think, oh my God, we must have done it. And they haven't. And you feel for Zambia because, you know, they had to play America, which had obviously Emma Hayes' footprint all over it. They lost 3-0 in that game as well. And you would have just thought it was such a good performance, I think, from Zambia. So to have walked away from that game, 6-5 down and basically out of the competition now, it doesn't look good for them. It is quite a shame. Having said that, I mean, there's as much chance of Zambia going through as there is Canada going through at the moment. It's a really strange situation because it's the top 2 teams from each of the 3 groups that go through, plus the 2 best in 3rd place. And there's every chance that the 2 best in 3rd place are going to be on 3 points. So that is going to be a fascinating way to see that game, to see that unfold for the Olympics. But yeah, for me, undoubtedly game of the season. And I just wish that I'd be able to. It was one of those when you see the score popping up, you think, I just want to put it on, and I couldn't. And that's what I think was really frustrating. You've got to give people the access first for them to want to have it, and that was the frustrating part for me.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point about the inaccessibility, let's say, of it. And we will come back around to Canada as well because they are obviously a fascinating team. Mia, the Australia-Zambia game then, do you think it was just a case of 2 teams that could not defend or save goals but were quite good at scoring, or what? What do you think?
I have no idea, and it's one of those games where it's such a rarity to get 11 goals in a game like that, and I do feel for Zambia, to be fair, as well, because they only really have 2 players of note. One of them, let's also bear in mind, is the most expensive women's football player in the world, and you know it's tough to, as Barry said, you score 5 goals, you expect to win the game, but yeah, there was a lot of blunders from both goalkeepers. Mackenzie Arnold, somebody who, you know, you expect, given her track record, and I used to drop this in, but I don't care that she's not a West Ham player anymore. But she was nominated for the best goalkeeper with Mary Earps and Catacol. She cannot be making mistakes like that. I don't quite know what the problem is there. Someone mentioned earlier on that Australia have just fallen off since last year, and is it the home advantage that they had that pushed them through last year? Who knows? Because obviously they didn't have Sam Kerr much. They don't have her now. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just one of those games where you just realise that football is so cool and it's so unpredictable. And to score a goal in essentially the last minute to send your team home with 3 points, I guess, is just incredible. 11 goals, 1 game. The highlights were never ending. Highlights were never ending. That's worth. Sorry, Barry, that is worth the money you pay for it.
I mean, I can confirm the highlights were ending because I'm no longer watching them. So they did have a finite ending spot. If you're still watching them, something's gone wrong with your telly, mate.
Mia's going off to cry in the corner again now. That's that light getting switched back off. So looking at things a little bit more positively, though, in that game, do you think, Meg, that whilst Australia have maybe fallen off a cliff, it was a great result kind of for African football? Obviously, they've got 2 incredible players, one of which we've just said was the is the most expensive player in the world. Do you think that this shows a little bit of a sort of growth area in that region, and they should actually, whilst they're going to be disappointed that they made those mistakes at the back, do you think that maybe when the dust settles, they of course going to be disappointed, but they will be proud of themselves almost for kind of going toe to toe with Australia? I mean, it almost seemed that it was basically just their fitness that let them down in the end.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the fact that they were 5-2 up and, you know, went on to lose the game is crazy as it is. But the fact that they, yeah, as you said, went toe to toe with Australia, who are, I believe, 12th in the world rankings for the women's football teams, and they're 64th, Zambia. I mean, that's just ridiculous. The fact that 12th versus 64th essentially in the world can go toe to toe with each other. Like, you would not see that in the men's game. Well, I don't think you would personally, but it's mental. And I think you sort of look back to the World Cup as well last year, where loads of the African teams did really well. And, well, African teams and, you know, teams that, you know, you don't normally see doing well. And that's also due to the fact that the World Cup was expanded for the first time with, you know, allowing more teams in. But the fact that, like, if someone said to me, you know, why should I watch women's football? I would tell them to watch the highlights of that game, and I'd go, this is why, because crazy things like this happen. And it is just crazy. It blows my mind, because that game was just, you would look at that on paper and go, oh, Australia will walk all over them. But no, Zambia obviously were like, right, we're going to prove that, you know, we're a decent side here. And I think that going forward, that is a massive statement for African teams in women's football, because they've had so many issues behind the scenes at their, you know, at their international teams. And, you know, things like this game will get them so much exposure. Like, just a single game in the Olympics will get this team so much exposure. And I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, again, it's just growth in the game, isn't it? It's visibility and it's growth in the game. These players, there's some fantastic players coming out of kind of African countries now, which overall is just going to be good for growth and good for visibility in those regions, and good for potentially kind of extra income in those areas. So now we will hop on to the most exciting bits, because I just am fascinated by this entire situation. So Canada beat France 2-1, which is a massive, massive result for them. And interestingly enough, it also came out today that they are appealing the decision to have the points against them docked. So for anyone who lives under a rock, their head coach and a couple of backroom members of staff have been basically suspended for 1 year due to flying drones in enemy territory. So they've been spying on rival teams using the technology of drones. Wow, what a world we are now living in. This really is modern times. So first off, I'll start with you, Meg. Do you think that this is a fitting punishment? So they've been docked 6 points, and they've obviously, like I mentioned, had their head coach suspended along with a couple of backroom staff. What do you think? Do you think that they should win this appeal? Basically, the appeal is to have the points docking overturned. They are happy that their members of staff, I believe it's Priestman, have been suspended. They're happy with that, but they want these 6 points overturning. What do you think?
Well, you look at that and you've got two very strong punishments there. And I'm sure that a single player in that Canadian team had no idea that, you know, these drones were going to get sent into enemy territory. So when you look at it like that, why the hell should the players be punished for it, and, you know, not have a chance to progress in the Olympics? I think the punishment of, you know, suspending Priestman and some of the others, fair, because, you know, it was probably going on behind the scenes with them. But minus 6 points, like, in a tournament as well. I mean, they've brought it back to 0 already, though, which, you know, is amazing. It sort of shows that the players, they're like, yeah, -6 points. That's not going to, affect us in a way. And obviously, I think someone said in the comments that, if they win their next game, they qualify for the next round. So if you look at it like that, the players have almost like not ignored it, but said, this is nothing to do with us. We're going to show that we still deserve to be in this. So if I was looking at it, I hope they get the points appealed. I hope that gets scrapped.
Yeah, interesting. Barry, what's your take on this? Do you think the punishment was befitting the crime, or would you have liked to have seen a harsher or lesser punishment?
Do you know what? I think this has been one of the most amazing things that I have ever seen happen before my eyes. Like, just unreal. When it started, it was hilarious. Like, genuinely, when I first heard that Canada had flown a drone over the New Zealand track, I was rolling about. I'm like, oh my God, that's quite funny, quite clever. But as with most things, you only have to peel back the surface just a little bit to realise that actually it wasn't just as bad as that. It was systemic and endemic and part of their culture, something they've been doing for some time. And it's so frustrating because there's two sides of this to look at. There's the admin side, which I think is just so overwhelmingly guilty, it's unbelievable. And then you've got the playing side, for which I'm still very much on the fence. The women are saying that they didn't see any of it. They didn't know anything about it. And I'm inclined to believe them. But I think I recall seeing somebody on the men's side saying, because it's happened on their side as well, I recall one of them saying that they had seen or did know of some footage that had come from there that they'd used. And it's one of those really frustrating things, because if you've used that to get yourself a advantage in a behind closed doors setting, you've effectively done something that you shouldn't do. Now, when you go onto the Canada website, there is actually a job description, and the job description for this person very clearly states in it that they should be able to operate a drone, which is wild. And this was for January, by the way. That was when you could get your applications in by. And it's still up there at this very moment for you to be able to read, which I just thought was unreal. Even after all this, you'd think you'd get through your media and have a look and try and get rid of these sort of things. But it's as clear as day. And as a result, I think this is a real problem. Now, I'm always on the side of the players in these sorts of things, always, because the players are just there to play football. That's what they want to do. The fact is that Bev Priestman and the other two, Manda and I forget the other person's name, but the three of them have brought this whole game into more disrepute than you ever could have imagined. That they suspended them immediately, which I think was sensible, and for that reason I do think that 6 points is too much. It's a really weird thing. They're sat here in the Olympics now, and it's almost as if they knew that game had finished before they put the points deduction in. What was interesting about that is that Canada had just won their game, and also Colombia had not won their game. They'd lost to France. So it's really interesting. Why 6 points? Like, you either kick them out of the competition if it's that bad, or you don't punish the players. So to choose 6 points seemed really weird. And actually, when you consider the fact that Colombia had lost, what they were basically saying was to maintain, I suppose, the integrity of the competition, is that if Canada go on to win their next game, which they did, in the 102nd minute, by the way, with Vanessa Gillis scoring that goal, it's absolutely unreal. The route was always there, and it has hit a point where if they beat Colombia, they are going to qualify. Now, it's almost like they knew that in the back of their minds, that there was still a way for Canada to get through, and that's why they chose 6. So if they really want to make an example of Canada and the ability to use that, then kick them out of the competition, if that's what you really want to do. But I don't think that's fair on the players who have, I'm not going to say they've trained for 3 years just to do this Olympics, because they haven't. This is their job. It's what they do. They play football week in, week out. It's not like the Olympics for the men where they're under 23s. It's a very different kettle of fish for the women. Personally, I think 3 points would have been more than enough. In other words, just not give the 3 points to New Zealand, because New Zealand weren't good enough on the day. But equally, did Canada get that win because they used intelligence? Because what made me laugh was Bev Priestman stepped down and said, yeah, all right, look, to protect the integrity of the match, I won't manage the team. And you almost want to sit there and go, but on the back of a fag packet, there's what I know. And the other, thank you very much, just leave that over there. So it's too much shrouded in, was there cheating, was there not? I'd have got rid of those 3 points and just said carry on from where you are. That would be me personally. I see Sean asking, should they have their gold medal from 2021 taken away? I think there needs to be a much longer investigation into that as to whether it was actually used and to what extent. But it's just like Canada are always in the news. They're in the news for not paying their players, and now they're in the news for, all the money obviously went on the drones. So there you go. They just got to sort their lives out, I think. On the plus side, though, I don't know if anybody saw the graphic that I put out when that first happened. Over nearly 200,000 people saw that one. One of my favourite comments for that one was, it's clearly somebody's first day on the job. And my personal favourite, this looks like it's been put together by someone with a minute knowledge of paint in 5 to 10 minutes. And they're exactly right. It is a very minute knowledge of paint, and it was exactly between 5 and 10 minutes. So there you go. Just goes to show. But 200,000 people nearly. What a time to be alive.
Yes, and if you have not seen that graphic, along with Tom Gary's article, I highly recommend you go through our Twitter, the All for Wofo one, and you find it, and you heart it, you bookmark it so you can look at it late at night when you're bored, because it is chef's kiss. Oh, hang on. I'm not happy about this. Let me just...
Shots fired.
Do you know what? Sean just comes into these comments to aggravate me. I think now I found the new block and remove forever button, it might be getting used a little bit more. Anyway, back to the matter in hand. Mia, finally, I don't think I've come to you yet, but to be honest, I've sort of lost track. Firstly, you can go back and answer Sean's question. Do you think they should be stripped of their previous medal? And secondly, what do you think about the punishment? Fair, not fair? Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the 6 points isn't fair at all. I don't think that's fair. I think if this had been discovered mid-tournament, I think that's a different question. I think the fact that Bev Priestman didn't start managing the team, she wasn't there for that game, I think that for me is the point where that becomes a little bit harsh, because she's now not in control of that team, and sort of the people that did have control of the drones are now not there anymore. So I think if it was mid-tournament, it would be different, but it isn't. So I think it's fair for them to go and them to suffer the consequences. As we've said, the players, I don't know how much I trust of what they say, but I'm not part of the investigation. So there we go. But yeah, as for the gold medals, again, that's really hard to just say, yeah, they deserve to have them gone, because we just don't know how it was used, whether they were used. Obviously, you don't want to remove something from somebody if it's not deserved. So I think Canada had a fantastic Olympic tournament in 2020, 2021. So you don't want to remove it for no reason, but that is, as Barry said, that's a whole different conversation, and we need a hell of a lot more evidence before we can start saying, yeah, they deserve their gold medals to be stripped from them. But yeah, it's just crazy. It's just crazy, and I love drama, and keeping up with this, it has just been, I mean, for Canada fans and Canadians, hellish, I imagine. Real hellish. But for outsiders, this is fun. This is fun to keep up with. This is so weird. But yeah, I don't have any more to say. Everyone's covered it.
To be clear,
No, I think
not
that's fair.
only would I have reduced the points arrears that they've been taken off, I would have also increased the fine. And the reason for that again is because I think it's the wrong people that are being punished. The players are being punished, and they didn't go, oh, I know what would be a good idea. Bob, why don't you take your drone, fly it up over there? We can have a little look, see what positions the New Zealand not going to be playing in, because God forbid we use technology and watch previous games. How about we just have a look at that, have a little look, see if they got any ideas coming up. They didn't do that. They've just sat there and gone, Bob, tell me what it is you want me to do. And off they go out and do it. I don't know if I've used Bob, because I don't really know any Canadian names that I could use there. But genuinely, to me, that's the drama. So I think the people that should be being punished here are the federation, because they're the ones that advertise the job. They're the ones that allow the culture. So I would increase. It's only £175,000. I would up that, maybe make it $500,000. Make it so it's something that nobody, if they don't want it to happen again, don't let it happen again. But take that away from the players. I don't think it's fair that they should be the ones that are punished.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I don't know whether I'm a little bit more harsh on things. I'm almost surprised they didn't just get booted out the whole competition, to be honest. Especially knowing, because this is kind of like the Olympics is obviously multi-event, and I think I've said before, like I'm fairly involved with like athletics and things like that. And if this kind of thing happened as some sort of equivalent in athletics, the entire team would be gone. Basically, we've seen scandals before. Typically more around doping and things like that, which aren't necessarily comparable, but athletes that are potentially innocent have been punished because of other athletes doping. And again, I'm not saying it's comparable, but in some ways I am surprised, and Canada have potentially got off lightly because they very easily could have just been booted out. I do feel like the 6-point deduction was a bit weird. Like Barry said before, I would have almost either kicked them out or kept them in up to that fine. That
Well,
being
the
said,
appeal they've put in goes to the 31st. So they play Colombia on the 31st, and by midday, we should know whether or not the appeal has been successful or not. But if you were looking for a comparison, I'd compare it with Aston Villa and the Conti Cup last season. Very similar to that.
yeah, probably a fair one. I think it's difficult because it's kind of happened after the event's already started, like Villa. And the problem is people are going to feel hard done by. Certain countries are going to feel hard done by, and they're going to feel like, had Canada been binned off, say Canada get through now, it'll kind of be offering merit, to be fair to them. So they've had to have worked damn hard to kind of do it. But they've essentially taken another country's position who might not get that kind of opportunity again, who will have done things by the book. But I think there was a comment further up that basically said, this is just the first time that someone's been caught. And yeah, I fully believe. I think there was a scandal a few years ago. I want to say it was Leeds. We're using drones to spy on people, but Leeds, I'm sorry if it wasn't you. I don't know. But there was a domestic English team that were kind of caught spying. And I think the issue around this Canadian saga is we just don't know how far back it goes. And like Mia and Barry have already said, it's difficult basically to judge when it's so fresh. That being said, it's going to create a lot of fun drama for us all to follow along with, because I imagine that as this tournament goes on, and even after the Olympics finish, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, especially around their previous gold medal. And it'll be very interesting to see kind of how deep this goes, how many people were aware of it, because there definitely wasn't just 3 people. And I imagine some of these players also knew damn well what was going on, as much as they're not going to come out and say they do, because why would they? That would be a very silly goose move. That's straight away just Olympic dream over. But yeah, I imagine that they were all huddled around a little screen somewhere watching a drone fly over. And quite honestly, I hope, well, no, I don't hope this saga continues, because no one wants cheating. But as a neutral with no skin in the game, Team GB didn't make it. Yeah, like TJ's just said here, it's just a bit funny for the rest of us. I mean, at the end of the day, it is serious, but I thought we'd end the show anyway on a little light-hearted note. So there's a couple of days off, but the Women's Olympics are back in action on the 31st. And stay tuned because it's going to be fascinating around what happens with Canada. I think that, again, for us neutrals, that might be one of the kind of big points for us to follow. And it's definitely going to be a good tournament to watch. So thank you very much for tuning in. All our Twitter handles are on screen. If you want to give the channel a follow, it is All for Wofo on Twitter. Thank you. I really should know that probably. And don't forget, like and subscribe. Thank you everyone in the comments. It has been lovely to be back in the hosting seat. I am now going to go and sleep for 1,000 years. And I'll see you next week.